by energy consultancy firm Energy Link, released today. The Transport Agency has agreed to review a snow chain ban on Arthur's Pass after a meeting with enraged road users last night. At the meeting in Castle Hill, the agency agreed to issue permits so residents can have some exemptions. Snow has accumulated on the pass today, but it remains open except to towing vehicles. It's coming up to 5:04. The All Blacks captain Sam Cane is again missing from the Chiefs lineup against the Blues in Hamilton on Saturday night. Cane suffering from a back injury, which saw him also miss his side's opening Super Rugby Aotearoa match, the 1-point loss to the Highlanders in Dunedin last weekend. Coach Warren Gatland says it's proving a frustrating injury to get over.
He's had this issue with his back in terms of it just tightening up and it seemed to come right and then it just flares up again. So unfortunately on Tuesday he felt good and he's done a bit of contact and it's just tightened up a bit.
Warren Gatland. Australia's only player in the ANZ Netball Championship remains stranded in Sydney and doesn't know when she'll get clearance to travel. Georgia Marshall is contracted to Waikato Bay of Plenty Magic with the 6-team competition resuming tomorrow night. She's been repeatedly declined clearance to cross the Tasman. Cycling New Zealand has confirmed the National Criterium Champs will again be held on the streets of Christchurch in November. Manchester City returned to their winning ways as English football's Premier League resumed after a 100-day hiatus. Players from the 4 clubs in action, City, Arsenal, Aston Villa and Sheffield United, went down on one knee to show support against racism, wearing shirts with Black Lives Matter on their backs. City beat Arsenal 3-0, while faulty goal line technology robbed Sheffield United of a win over Aston Villa, with the match finishing 0-0. That's the news.
Was there a kiss and a cuddle?
There were not hugs and kisses. What I can say is that there was a very fleeting arm put around the women to provide comfort.
But is there more to come?
Now he's dancing on the head of a pin, having gone within 24 hours to say this was not true, to now saying this is true but not all of it.
And a bombshell book reveals all about President Trump.
The cat, though, is firmly out of the bag. You can pick your metaphor.
No pussyfooting around. Morning Report, weekdays from 6 on air and online.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. In the west from Northland to Taranaki, also Coromandel, rain, possibly heavy, easing to a few showers tonight. Bay of Plenty and Taupo, rain with heavy falls easing later tomorrow. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, scattered rain becoming widespread tonight with heavy falls. Whanganui and Taihape to Wellington, also Wairarapa. Periods of rain, heavy at times, easing tomorrow. Nelson, Buller and Westland, scattered rain, clearing Westland tonight. Marlborough and Canterbury, rain possibly heavy with snow to about 500 metres, gradually easing tomorrow. For Otago, Southland and Fiordland, mainly fine. Isolated showers retreating to the coast this evening, clearing about the south coast later tonight. Chatham Islands, cloudy periods. RNZ National, it's 5:07.
Thanks, Susanna, and welcome to Checkpoint. I'm Lisa Owen. There have been promises to do better, but no apology from the Prime Minister for the latest bungle at the border. The blame game is heating up after the revelation 2 women were allowed to leave managed isolation early after one of their parents died and without taking the required test. They later tested positive for coronavirus, and politicians and officials are under pressure not only over the lapse, but also elements of the women's story that only came to light after being revealed in Parliament by the opposition. On Tuesday, the public was assured the women only had contact with one relative in Wellington. But by this morning, there was an admission the women had got lost heading out of Auckland and had fleeting contact with a person who helped them. The Prime Minister and her deputy, Winston Peters, are also at odds over whether those responsible for allowing the 2 women to leave should be tracked down. Here's our political editor, Jane Patterson.
The blame game is on for who should take responsibility.
I've certainly been upset by it, and I apologise that we've ended up in this position. As I said this morning, and I want to reiterate, I've taken responsibility to make sure that the system is sorted.
Dr Ashley Bloomfield is one person in the gun. He told reporters he made public the updated information about the 2 women getting lost and then having contact with a person who gave them directions as soon as he found out himself.
In this situation, yes, the information has evolved. I haven't kept that to myself. I have shared it.
Another is Health Minister David Clarke.
The expectations of ministers and of myself are very clear that people will have those 2 tests in mandatory self-isolation.
But the opposition still has its sights on David Clarke.
Who will take responsibility for the quarantine management failures in this situation?
The reality is that there is a full-scale investigation as to how it happened. And those people will take responsibility.
No apology, though, from the Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern.
Of course, I feel huge remorse that this has happened, but I am making sure that we are fixing the system. If I had any personal responsibility for what happened here, of course, I'd take that. But my job is to lead. I wear that and I keep going.
Should those further down the ranks come under scrutiny? Winston Peters, speaking on behalf of the Prime Minister, told Parliament, yes.
We're going to find those people at the coalface who didn't follow the protocols. The only way we can eliminate this sort of irresponsible behaviour or failure to fulfil the protocol requirements is to identify those people and make sure that doesn't, as much as possible, happen again.
Speaking across town at another event, Jacinda Ardern was asked if that was an appropriate comment.
No, and look, that's something that you will have heard from me. This has been a failure of the system. I'm not interested in going down into individuals and finding out exactly who. We do need to know what happened so that we can fix it, but that has to be our ultimate focus, not a witch hunt.
Mr Peters told reporters afterwards, while he doesn't want a witch hunt, the individuals need to be found to ensure they don't make the same mistake again.
I don't know how you think accountability works, but if there's a mistake, you go and find out who is responsible. If is it the person at the top or is it the person on the bottom? So if you want to improve the organisational capacity, you find out where the mistakes are.
And an opportunity during question time to turn the tables back on National.
Were the 2 women who tested positive for COVID-19 this week released from quarantine following personal representations advocating their early release from quarantine by National MP Chris Bishop?
Mr Speaker, I am aware of that.
Chris Bishop dismissed this as a desperate smear from the government to hide its own failings at the border. He says he did advocate on behalf of the 2 women who'd asked for help in getting their application urgently assessed. Mr Bishop says he asked for the case to be looked at by officials, but this was obviously on the basis testing would occur and the rules would be followed. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Jane Patterson.
Another case of COVID-19 has been caught at the border, this time a man in his 60s who's returned home from Pakistan. The Director-General of Health, Ashley Bloomfield, says the man didn't have any symptoms when he arrived at Auckland Airport, but got sick while he was in managed isolation. It comes as health officials continue to deal with the fallout from the bungles that led to 2 women being allowed to leave isolation on compassionate grounds, only to later test positive for the virus. Here's our reporter, Sarah Robson.
The latest COVID-19 case, a man in his 60s, arrived in Auckland last Saturday. Ashley Bloomfield says the man had flown from Lahore via Doha in Melbourne. Because he didn't have any symptoms when he landed, he was sent into managed isolation.
A few days ago, he developed some symptoms and he was transferred, as happens with anyone who develops any symptoms during their 14-day quarantine period. He was transferred to our dedicated quarantine facility.
The man was tested on Tuesday and the positive result came back last night. Everyone who was on the man's flight from Melbourne is being contacted, but Dr Bloomfield says that job is made easier because they are all in managed isolation. But contact tracers are still trying to track down 27 of the 364 contacts of the 2 women who tested positive for COVID-19 earlier this week. The women had been allowed to leave managed isolation to drive to Wellington after the death of a parent. Despite earlier assurances they hadn't had contact with anyone else during the trip, Dr Bloomfield had to clarify last night that the women needed the help of 2 friends after they got lost.
They took the wrong motorway entrance and ended up, and for those of you who haven't lived in Auckland, it can be done. They ended up travelling north instead of south. And I think partly due to the stressful circumstances they were in. When they were able to get off the motorway, they rang the friends who had dropped the car off, and the car had been dropped off in a contactless way with the keys given to a security guard, and arranged to meet them to help them get back on the motorway in the right place.
Ashley Bloomfield says there was a brief conversation and short physical contact, an arm around one or both of the women.
This is information we've verified with all those involved. And I just want to reiterate, the two women here, who are the ones who have lost a parent, don't actually have any recollection of that element of the exchange, which is why we have verified that in Auckland.
The two friends have been tested. One has come back negative and the other result is pending. Despite that, Ashley Bloomfield acknowledges the situation will have shaken people's confidence in the border systems.
I've certainly been upset by it, and I apologise that we've ended up in this position.
And it appears some hotels haven't been geared up to do the mandatory tests of everyone in managed isolation. Jessie Phelan and her husband arrived in Auckland last Tuesday and have been at the Ridges Hotel. She was told there were no plans to test everyone at the hotel on days 3 and 12 as required, until today. She's worried the procedures in place until now have been too lax.
We really thought that these border measures were a safeguard to protect the rest of the country from what could be new infections.
Ashley Bloomfield says those tests have only been required since the move to level 1 as an extra precaution.
It was taking longer to roll out than I expected, and that is what we're fixing now.
And University of Otago law professor Andrew Geddes says people who refuse to be tested can be kept in managed isolation beyond the 14-day period.
People can't be physically held down and have swabs shoved up their nose. It's not forced on them in that way. But the reality is, if you want to get out of isolation, the order does give the power to the medical officer of health to say, take the test or you don't get out.
There are just over 3,400 people in managed isolation in Auckland, Wellington and Christchurch. There are about 150 people in higher level quarantine. Mō te hōtaka o te ahi, ko Sarah Robson, aho.
Meanwhile, there is confusion tonight over whether passengers will be required to wear masks on Trans-Tasman flights or not. Two sisters who tested positive for COVID-19 this week transited through Brisbane from the UK, and a man in his 60s returned from Pakistan via Melbourne. Today, the Director-General of Health, Ashley Bloomfield, said he had asked his team to look at the option of requiring all passengers to wear masks on Trans-Tasman flights for the duration of the flight. And in a statement a short time ago, the Ministry of Health said medical-grade masks should be offered to passengers on international flights, and they should be strongly encouraged to use these masks as a precautionary measure while on board. But Air New Zealand has just told Checkpoint whilst masks will be offered on flights, it won't be compulsory to wear them. Amy Williams reports.
Director-General of Health Ashley Bloomfield says masks will be compulsory for every passenger on board flights from Australia for the duration of the flight. It comes after 3 new cases of COVID-19 this week, all from travellers transiting through Australia. At the moment, it's not compulsory to wear masks on incoming flights.
People are coming from a whole lot of international flights and transiting through and then coming on, and just as an additional precaution, the advice from our infection prevention and control team was to make masks available. I felt it was important to require masks for the duration of that flight, so we're putting that in place as well.
An Air New Zealand flight attendant RNZ spoke to, who wishes to remain anonymous, felt more at risk when passengers on the long-haul flights they worked on did not wear masks. The crew member chose to isolate from their family during the lockdown in level 3 to keep them safe, and only reunited after a voluntary test for COVID-19 returned a negative result. Air New Zealand international crew returning home are allowed to fly domestically to their homes to self-isolate for 48 hours before having a COVID-19 test. They're not required to quarantine or self-isolate for 14 days like other international arrivals, but must stay in their rooms while overseas and wear PPE through airports. Air2 Union Head of Aviation, Savage, says they would support all passengers wearing masks on board flights.
Best practice needs to be followed, and internationally it has been recommended that air travellers should be required to use masks, but it's not a requirement.
The Ministry of Health and Air2 have launched a survey to find out if airline staff are following self-isolation rules while overseas. Air New Zealand was contacted for the story but did not respond in time. Savage says the aim is to find out how strictly the self-isolation rules are being followed.
We don't want to turn cabin crew into pariahs because they're actually doing a really difficult job. But what we want to do is fix the problems. If there's a problem there, let's fix the problem, let's plug the gaps in the system.
The ministry has reiterated that it expects to see more cases of COVID-19 entering our shores as Kiwis return from overseas. Dr Bloomfield says the borders need to be watertight.
We're not out of the woods yet on this. There is a large global pandemic underway. Secondly, we will see further cases. We are absolutely committed to ensuring that the border is watertight so that we keep New Zealanders safe.
Air New Zealand told Checkpoint this afternoon it wasn't treating the masks as compulsory, but they would be offered to passengers on Trans-Tasman flights. For Checkpoint, Amy Williams.
It is 5:20 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Tell us what you think about that. Should masks be compulsory on flights? And if they are optional, will you choose to wear one? You can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Revelations in the House today that National MP Christopher Bishop advocated for the early release of 2 women who had brought COVID-19 back into the country has raised more questions than answers. The 2 women were granted compassionate release from their managed isolation to visit their dying mother earlier this month. Here's how it unfolded today with Labour Minister Chris Hipkins in Question Time.
Were the 2 women who tested positive for COVID-19 this week released from quarantine following personal representations advocating their early release from quarantine by National MP Chris Bishop?
Mr Speaker, I am aware of that.
Can you please elaborate a little bit more on what you were saying about National MP lobbying for the 2 sisters to...
I think that's probably a matter that you should ask him about.
How did you become aware of it?
I think that's a matter that you should ask him about.
No, you became aware of it.
You brought it up in the House, though.
What are the developments?
With Minister Hipkins revealing, or David Parker revealing, that it was Chris Bishop who was the one that lobbied the 2 women to come down to Wellington.
Well, I'm not surprised by that. I mean, one moment he's clickbaiting, the next day he's lobbying some other woman.
Can I ask?
You got that part right?
Isn't he just doing his job as an electorate?
Sorry?
Can I ask about...
Hang on. Don't you get it? There's 5 million people who've got to keep the laws and the protocols in this country, and every minute and every half hour and every hour matters. But no, rather than do the job of informing the authorities, they thought they'd turn it to politics. So it shows that their integrity or good faith is seriously to be challenged here.
And that was the voice of Winston Peters ending that piece. So why did National go into bat for these women? The Hutt South MP, National's Christopher Bishop, joins me now. Good evening. Can you just explain very clearly what role you played in the application for these women to get early leave from isolation?
Yeah, sure. I was contacted on Friday night by the 2 women via email. When I saw the email on Saturday afternoon, I forwarded it to the email address that's been provided to MPs for that purpose and asked the officials to look at it expeditiously, I think was the language used. And I'm doing my job as an MP. MPs get contacted by constituents and by people all the time asking for assistance. We're expected to do that, and that's exactly what I was doing. This is just a desperate attempt by the government to distract away from their incompetent management at the border, and I think, frankly, it's pretty disgraceful that an MP doing their job is being dragged into this.
OK. Is that all you wrote in the email? Please look at this and quickly.
Yeah, essentially words to that effect. I don't have the email right in front of me, but essentially words to that effect, and ask the officials to take a look at it.
Do you know these women?
No, I don't know the women.
Had you had any conversations with them?
No, I hadn't had any conversations with the women. It was all done
or their family members?
Via email. No, not their family members either. I was. They were put in touch with me because one of their close friends, who's based in the United Kingdom, is known to me and knows that I'm essentially the local MP, or certainly an MP in the area connected.
So you have a mutual
he told
friend
them to contact me.
So you have a mutual friend. Is that the situation?
Well, yes, we have a mutual friend. They obviously, I think, asked him for assistance. He said to them, "You need to contact Chris Bishop in the hut," and they did. And I forwarded it on, and that's essentially where the matter was left.
So this mutual friend, did they get in contact and ask you to push this through?
They contacted me and said, "Hey, I've got these two friends of mine in Auckland," and they said, "What should they do?" And I said they should send me an email. They subsequently did that. That was on Friday night and then Saturday morning, and I forwarded it on.
And is the mutual friend a personal friend of yours?
I haven't seen him for some years.
But he is a personal friend of yours, to be clear.
No, I would regard him as an acquaintance. I haven't seen him for over a decade. So I don't think people who haven't seen people for a decade regard them as personal friends.
Okay, so you said you're doing your job for constituents. These women don't live in your neck of the woods.
That's correct. My understanding is they have a connection to the area, obviously through the family member who they were wanting to go down and visit. I did what MPs are required to do, or not required, or essentially obliged to do, and dozens of MPs from around the Parliament will have done over the last 3 months or so. I've dealt with probably hundreds of inquiries and forwarded them on to the appropriate address, everything from essential businesses to immigration matters through to, in this case, the compassionate exemption.
Was there anything in your email that would be regarded as a personal appeal or persuasion or open support for them to get an exemption?
I don't believe so. I believe I was doing my job, and I think this is a smear by Labor because they know that they're under pressure.
Understand that. You've said that, but I just want to sort through the facts here. Have you done this for any other people seeking early leave from isolation?
No, and my office.
So this is the only one.
Well, this is the only case that my office has dealt with. But as I say, I've dealt with a variety of different cases, everything from essential businesses to immigration, and almost every other MP in the House, I'm sure, will have done the same thing. This is what MPs do. People contact MPs, and we help. That's what I do, and I'm pretty proud of my track record in the hut of helping thousands of people over the 6 years.
Understand that. We want to concentrate on these two women that you helped in this case. So when the mutual friend contacted you, did that person say that these women are trustworthy and they can be well trusted and relied on to leave isolation and play by the rules? Was there any conversation about that?
No, there was no conversation around that. It was essentially words to the effect of, it was all done via text, words to the effect of, I've got these two women who are in this pretty unfortunate situation. Can you assist? And I said they need to email me, and I'll take it from there.
So this casual acquaintance knows you well enough to have your personal cell phone number?
Wasn't done via a cell phone text message. It was done in a different way, a Twitter direct message, as it happens, that he slid into the DMs, and we exchanged it that way.
Have you heard from the women since, and have they thanked you for your support and help?
No, I have not heard. I wrote back to them and said that I'd forwarded it to the email address and let them know, and they wrote back and essentially informed me about the situation they were in, and said thanks for doing that.
And that was the end of your correspondence?
Correct.
Appreciate your time this evening. That is the Hutt South MP, National's Christopher Bishop. The government has pushed through its second tranche of firearms reforms 15 months since a gunman killed 51 people in Christchurch. The legislation, which has been mired in delay, passed its final reading this afternoon with the support of Labour, New Zealand First and the Greens. It includes a firearms registry, harsher penalties and a warning system to show if a licence holder is a fit and proper person. Here's our Deputy Political Editor, Craig McCulloch.
She became the face of firearms reform after March 15. Jacinda Ardern promising drastic action.
I can tell you one thing right now. Our gun laws will change.
And change they did. The Prime Minister acted swiftly to ban most semi-automatic firearms. All but one MP voted in favour. The promised second tranche of changes, though, has had a harder road. The Police Minister, Stuart Nash, had hoped to have it over the line before the one-year anniversary of the shootings. It appears he forgot to update today's speech.
The 15th of March 2019 will always be a devastating day in our history. It's been nearly a year since that day.
It's been more than a year. 15 months of disagreement and delay, with New Zealand First primarily dragging its heels. At last this week, a breakthrough. Changes to the legislation agreed to get New Zealand First and its gun spokesperson Ron Mark on board, even if somewhat reluctantly.
Prime Minister made a call. We support the Prime Minister.
The legislation paves the way for a nationwide gun register, but it won't come into force until 2023. It brings in harsher penalties for lawbreakers, and in 6 months, new rules will kick in to determine who is fit and proper to own firearms.
At the heart of the new laws is the new principle that the possession and use of arms is a privilege.
But the support of New Zealand First comes with a warning. It's not entirely happy. It secured a review of the legislation in 3 years' time, 2 years earlier than originally planned.
This government, and New Zealand First as part of this government, is passing this legislation. But don't be rolling out the bubbles and popping the cork too quickly, because after this election's over, there will be closer scrutiny on what we've done.
The biggest difference in Parliament, compared to the first tranche of changes, is the lack of political unity, not just New Zealand First's reluctance, but the National Party fully in opposition. Nick Smith says the problem was not the old law, but whether it was properly enforced.
Because we can change all the laws we like, Mr. Speaker, but if the law as it was not followed, do not pretend that we are going to the core and, excuse the pun, hitting our target of making sure we have reacted responsibly and properly to the awful tragedy that occurred in Christchurch.
The Royal Commission into the terror attack is due to report back before the end of July. The Prime Minister today secured the changes she promised, but not in the way she would have wanted. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Craig McCulloch.
On Checkpoint on RNZ National, the number of people being denied benefits because their partners earn too much has skyrocketed. Auckland's water crisis deepens despite rain. The reservoirs are only at 43% full. And the borders might be closed, but Australia hatches a plan to get international students back. We would love your feedback on anything on the program this evening. Get in touch about whether you think masks on flights should be compulsory. Should we forge ahead with the Trans-Tasman bubble or not? And let us know your thoughts on isolation and how it's working here. Text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or you can flick us an email. checkpoint@rnz.co.nz is the address. But here's Susanna now with the headlines.
The Prime Minister and the Deputy Prime Minister are at odds over whether the workers responsible for the border botch-up need to be tracked down. Winston Peters says those at the coalface who allowed 2 women to leave isolation on compassionate grounds without being tested for COVID-19 will be found. Jacinda Ardern says while it's important to find out what happened, singling out individuals is inappropriate. A third person has tested positive for the coronavirus during his 14-day isolation in Auckland. The man arrived from Pakistan via Doha and Melbourne and is now in managed quarantine facilities. Ukraine's Secret Service is claiming it stopped a neo-Nazi cell during its investigation into the distribution of the Christchurch terrorists' so-called manifesto. Last year, the ambassador of Ukraine vowed to prosecute anyone distributing the document after it was revealed it was being reproduced and sold in paperback following the March 15th attacks. The government's second tranche of firearms changes has passed its third and final reading this afternoon. The legislation was promised in the wake of last year's Christchurch shootings and is designed to stop firearms falling into the wrong hands. The police minister says it's a historic milestone for community safety. The police have confirmed a body found in Northland is that of Bridget Simmons, who had been missing since last February. They found the body on a rural property in Parakau last week and believe several people have more information about what happened to Ms Simmons. An analysis of river inflows into North Island lakes shows the past 4 weeks have been the third driest on record since 1931. It comes as Watercare is pleading with Aucklanders to conserve water as its reservoirs sit at 43% full with no significant rainfall in sight. Those are the latest news headlines on RNZ National. Our next news and weather update is at 6.
Thanks, Susanna. Kia ora anō. This is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. Let's get to the business news now with Giles Beckford. Well, the first hit to economic growth from the COVID-19 pandemic has been confirmed. Gross domestic product, GDP, has fallen 1.6% in the 3 months to the end of March. So, Giles, this is obviously the beginning of the slide down. How bad do we expect it to get?
Well, I think this confirms that we are in a deep hole, and the figures for the 3 months ended June, so we're just coming up to the end of the second quarter. The broad range of estimates is that the economy will shrink by another 15 to 20% in that 3 month period. Now, that, of course, captures virtually all the lockdown period and then some of the easing of the restrictions. But it will confirm, although we don't need any confirmation, we can say it for sure now, the economy's in a deep recession. We are likely to stay there for at least the next year or more. It's going to be quite some time. But, big parts of the economy, tourism, foreign students, those sorts of things, they're still lost to us with the borders being closed. That's 5-6% of GDP straight away. And then with people being nervous about their jobs, because we expect to see unemployment rising, possibly up 8 to 9%, then we will see people being nervous about spending. People will be nervous about perhaps selling houses or buying houses. Businesses will not be wanting to invest. They'll be cautious about their money. I suspect that we will start to see a wave of business failures. Now, there may not be big businesses, but there will be businesses going under who just can't sustain the borrowing, the debt, the lack of cash flow. So all of that is for grim reading, which we'll get to see in some detail in 3 months' time at the end of September. But let's just take it for granted that we're in the mire because of the pandemic, and we're likely to be here for a while.
So, okay, we're on the mat and for some time, but the bounce back, is it expected to be slow? I mean, I saw some forecasts saying by 2022 we should be back to 4.5% unemployment. So is it going to be a long road back or not?
Well, I think you throw your dart at the board or you flick through the telephone directory and just pick your numbers because, frankly, we don't know. We're in territory that we haven't seen in decades, and the shock to the economy is likely to be the biggest next or this quarter that we've seen in more than a century. We do expect in the third quarter, that's the 3 months to September, to see a reasonable bounce back in activity. So we'll then see growth for that quarter alone of perhaps 10, 13, possibly 15%. So that's part of the background, the easing of the restrictions coming into play. Of course, we won't know about those figures until the end of the year anyway. But the point is that we've taken a significant hit to significant parts of the economy. It's going to linger longer. There are those who suggest that we might see a return to positive annual growth, perhaps by about this time next year. But to get back to where we were before COVID-19 hit the economy, then 2022 is an optimistic bet, I think, in many people's minds. We could be talking towards 2023 before we start to see us actually making progress beyond the pandemic.
So, does this mean that the government and the Reserve Bank are going to have to, keep throwing everything at it?
No choice. I mean, the words of Grant Robertson and Adrian Orr, they're almost like the Top Twins when they were singing early on in the pandemic. We'll do whatever it takes to keep things going. That means the Reserve Bank is going to keep its money printing, its bond buying program going on. $60 billion is the limit at the moment, but we won't be surprised to see it rise to $90 billion perhaps by the end of the year, and possibly up to $120 billion going into next year. The government, on the other hand, who are having to do the real heavy lifting, doing the stimulation, the infrastructure projects, the support of business, the lending programs, the tax breaks that are being given, all those sorts of things, the government will just keep funding that through borrowing, remembering that Grant Robertson has $20 billion from the budget that's uncommitted at this stage for further programs. The significant thing, I think, in many people's minds will be what steps it takes to support businesses and employment once the second round of wage subsidies, the second wage subsidy scheme comes to an end. That's in September towards October. From that point of view, that will be the significant thing when the government starts to, or it will be looked at for the programs it's putting in. People want to see targeted spending. But if it means spending, then spending they will. And I think we just have to say that the government and the Reserve Bank, they're two of the forwards in the front row.
Shall we take a brisk tango through the market numbers?
Well, we've been playing snakes and ladders on the share market in recent days. Yesterday, we were scooting up 3.5%. That was after we'd taken a fair few days' hits. We're down the snake today, down 109 points, just under 1%, 11,225. On the currency market, 64.5 US cents, 93.7 Australian, and just over 51 British pence.
Thanks, Giles. That is our business editor, Giles Beckford, joining us live from our Wellington studio. The police officer fired after fatally shooting an African-American man has now been charged with murder. Garrett Rolfe is facing 11 charges related to the shooting of Rayshard Brooks in a restaurant car park in Atlanta. Mr Brooks was questioned after falling asleep at a drive-through restaurant and after a scuffle ran away carrying one of the officer's tasers. He fired the taser over his shoulder and was shot twice in the back by the pursuing officer. It's now emerged the officer kicked Mr Brooks as he lay dying on the ground. The BBC's Nick Bryant reports.
It started out as a routine call. An African-American reported asleep in his vehicle in the car park of a fast food restaurant in Atlanta, Georgia.
Can you step out with me, please? Yes, sir.
Rayshard Brooks was asked by police to take a sobriety test. Then he suggested he walk to his sister's home nearby.
I can just go home. I have my daughters there right now. My daughter's birthday was yesterday.
All right. Hold on, Miss Brooks. Blah, 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 blah. Stop.
But after he failed a breath test, the police decided to take him into custody. That's when a fight broke out in which he seized and fired one of the officer's tasers.
Stop fighting! Stop fighting! You're going to get tased! You're going to get tased! Mr. Wrong.
During a brief chase, he pointed the taser at the officer, who responded by fatally shooting him in the back. Tonight, prosecutors revealed shocking new details that Garrett Rolfe, the officer who killed Rayshard Brooks, had kicked him on the floor afterwards, and the other officer, Devin Brosnan, stood on his shoulders. Neither offered any medical help for 2 minutes. In announcing a felony murder charge against Officer Rolfe, Georgia's Attorney General showed a photograph of that kick and stressed Rayshard Brooks did not pose a serious threat that justified the use of lethal force.
The demeanor of the officers immediately after the shooting did not reflect any fear or danger of Mr. Brooks, but their actions really reflected other kinds of emotions.
Faced with such massive and multiracial Black Lives Matter protests, prosecutors are moving more swiftly to bring charges.
What makes this case so especially alarming is that even at a time of heightened racial tensions, a white police officer thought he could shoot an African-American in the back and then kick him on the ground afterwards. It will increase the already urgent demands for a major overhaul of American policing.
And that was the BBC's Nick Bryant with that story. A lot of you have been getting in touch about the issue of masks. Today, the Director General of Health, Ashley Bloomfield, at his press conference said he is going to be recommending the use of masks on trans-Tasman flights. And Air New Zealand has told us they'll supply the masks, but it won't be compulsory. Bob has got in touch to say, just been on my first internal flight and was a bit uncomfortable with 0 masks and the lady behind me sneezing all the way home. Good point, Bob. And And another one saying, yes, masks should be compulsory for passengers and cabin staff on planes. They should have been months ago. Rosemary, though, says an aviation expert told The Nation last week that the air on aircraft flying long haul have clean air, as clean as operating theatres, so why wear a mask? Another person says definitely masks must be compulsory on Trans-Tasman flights. Air New Zealand need to get their act together and take care of their responsibility to the country at the border. Air New Zealand should have to have proper quarantine procedures, and the airline needs to pay them for it instead of sacking staff. And this one, final one, says it's obvious and common sense that masks should be compulsory on flights, including domestic flights, they reckon. Why do we always wait until things go wrong before reacting and enforcing the rules? There is a huge lack of discipline in New Zealand, which is the root of all our problems. Just make mask wearing compulsory, full stop, they say. Keep your feedback coming. You can text us on 2101 or you can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or our email address is checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Auckland is on the cusp of an emergency water crisis as it stares down the barrel of the region's worst drought in 25 years, with reservoirs at just 43%. The Auckland Council is scrambling to secure extra water sources as it continues to plead with Aucklanders to conserve water inside their homes. It's a race against time as region's water reservoirs continue to dry out, and with no significant rainfall in sight, time is running out. This from Annika Smith and cameraman Simon Rogers.
Driving through the rolling hills of Henua, you'd never guess the region was in the grip of a severe drought. The landscape is green, bright grass covering farmland, but things are very different beneath the surface. Local farmers Bruce and Dot Chipman meet me on their neighbour David Hill's back deck for a cup of tea and some ginger nuts. The Chipman family celebrated 100 years on their farm last year. Bruce and Dot have carried on a tradition of keeping handwritten rain records and vintage stationery books.
Okay, yes, so the record started in 62, and of course, it was points and inches, so daily records there of the rain, with comment on what the weather was like each day.
Light shower.
Yeah, light fog, heavy dew.
Mist,
fine.
frost.
Yeah, showers each day, fine and cloudy.
In the Chipman's 60 years' worth of records, annual rainfall in the region has only dipped below 1,000 millimetres 5 times. The first in 1982, then 83, and a decade later in 1993. Annual rainfall was also less than 1,000 millimetres last year, and this year is tracking to be the same.
The last 12 months till the beginning of June was 966 mils. Our average is 1,300. The year prior to that was in the 900 mils as well, so we've got 2 years of extremely dry weather.
This year's dry spell is made all the more serious because, according to the Chipman's records, the Henua region missed out on about 350 millimetres of rainfall last year. And while the odd bit of rainfall over the past month means pastures now look green, the earth itself is bone dry. David Hill shows me a photograph of what the locally renowned Porcupine Hill looked like in February.
It's a lot drier there, isn't it?
Well, look at this. You know, if you were a cow, you'd look at me and say, you've got to be kidding, David. I can't. There's nothing for me there to eat.
30 minutes up the road, the walls of the upper Mangatangi Dam are dry and exposed. It's one of 9 water storage reservoirs in the Waitakere and Henua ranges that supply about 60% of Auckland's water. This week, they dropped to a record low of 43% full. If you're watching this story, at this time of the year, the water should ideally be up to this tree line. Much has been said about just how serious this is for the wider region, but James Talbot from Watercare puts it best. As operations controller for the Henua Headworks, he's on the ground day in and day out, working in the forest around the reservoirs.
I've had a few people come to me and ask me, is the situation being overhyped by the media? And the message from me personally is absolutely not. We are definitely staring down the barrel of a potentially very serious water shortage situation.
The past few months have been the driest on record for Auckland, seeing its reservoirs drop below halfway full for the first time since the 1994 water crisis. Since then, levels have teetered between 40 to 45% full, as Watercare, Auckland Council's water company, has scrambled to secure new water sources. Just this week, it used emergency powers to draw a further 15 million litres of water a day from the Waikato River, bringing the total daily pull to 165 million litres. Watercare is also building a new reservoir in Pukekohe and will bring the Hayes Creek Dam back into action by August. But time is running out, and all of these projects will only secure a very small fraction of the more than 400 million litres of water Aucklanders use every day. It's now been 1 month since the Auckland Council introduced mandatory water restrictions across the region, banning outdoor water use. However, just last week, Aucklanders exceeded their daily water usage target 3 times. So just how much does the average Aucklander know?
That the water levels are like maybe half of what they usually are, and we're not getting any rainfall, so that's particularly alarming.
Yeah, it's pretty bad at the moment. Until we get some more rain, I think it's going to get worse.
I've seen the photos on the news of the dam looking pretty low, and my water filter goes brown really quick. So I think because it's so low, it's like getting the mud from the dam.
I was raised up north, and we sort of conserve water religiously because it's, do you know how much tank water is?
Yeah, I'm having shorter showers at the moment. Probably about 4 minutes.
Shorter showers, saving dishwater, sharing showers with my partner.
Watercare is asking Aucklanders to reuse water where possible and only run the washing machine or dishwasher when they're full. But keeping showers to 4 minutes or less is by far the most effective way to keep water consumption down. If you ask David Hurl, he's only got one piece of advice for fellow Aucklanders on town water supply.
Well, try a 2-minute shower. There's a good start.
For Checkpoint, this is Annika Smith.
And you can watch Simon and Annika's story on our Facebook page or online, because there are some incredible drone pictures on our page. If you are in any doubt, that will show you what the situation is like. And Tanya and Matt have texted to say it's been hosing down in Auckland all day. Well, yeah, I know. I had to bring my brolly to work because we broadcast from Auckland, so we understand the situation. But we're told by experts you need rain like this every day for a while to fill the reservoirs. It is just a drop in the bucket, it seems. It is 10 minutes to 6. I'm Lisa Owen and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Do keep your feedback coming. You can text us on 2101. Tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or the email address for us is checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. There's a major push in Australia to get international students back in despite the border closure. Hundreds of international students could fly in as early as next month under a plan put forward by the Australian National University and the University of Canberra. The pilot has been given the green light by the ACT government and is waiting for approval from the federal government. The chartered flight is set to bring 350 students to Canberra and, if successful, will pave the way for other universities to follow. The ABC's Stephanie Boris reports.
Canberra in the middle of winter may not be everyone's ideal destination, but Vincent Nguyen is keen to get back.
I love it. In Vietnam currently it's almost 40 degrees. It's so hot. So yeah, I prefer the cold of Canberra.
Instead of studying at the University of Canberra, the 23-year-old is at home in Hanoi trying to learn online.
I prefer the face-to-face class more than online.
And he soon may get that chance. The University of Canberra and the Australian National University have teamed up to bring some international students back. Paddy Nixon is the Vice-Chancellor of the University of Canberra.
We need a trial for Australia to build that confidence. It's one city and one flight and 350 students.
Under the plan, students would make their way to a so-called central hub, likely Singapore, where a chartered plane would be waiting. They'd have to pay for a seat and there's no guarantee they'd get one.
So we've begun reaching out to our 400 plus continuing students to see how many of those would be willing to take this. Obviously, we have to do this carefully. and in a steady way.
The Australian National University has students from 50 countries. Brian Schmidt is the Vice-Chancellor.
We'll go out and reach out to students who we think are the ones we want to prioritise, and those are people finishing their degrees or doing those degrees that have a research or on-campus component that we just can't substitute away from digitally.
ANU has many Chinese students, and Beijing recently urged them to reconsider studying here, saying it wasn't safe. Professor Schmidt is hoping that won't stop them returning.
Our students are very savvy and they have very elaborate communication networks themselves. They know exactly what's going on.
The students will face 2 weeks quarantine once they arrive in Canberra, and the unis would pay for that. Paddy Nixon says they'll be tested for COVID-19 at the beginning and end of their hotel stay.
We've had to engage not just with the medical officers here in the ACT, but also with the federal government to ensure that we comply with all their expectations, regulations and protocols, and to ensure both the safety of the students but also of our community at large.
The ACT government has approved the plan, and it's now waiting for the green light from the Commonwealth. The Federal Education Minister Dan Tehan says a crucial condition is that the universities are open for on-campus classes. Both universities say they intend to do that next month, and that's good news for Vincent Nguyen.
I have a lot of friends in Canberra as well, so I miss Canberra.
Brian Schmidt is hopeful other universities will follow.
I am very pleased that our pilot seems to be first cab off the rank, but I think there will be other ones that are very soon after us.
South Australia is working on a plan to bring up to 800 students back, but it will have to lift all its domestic border restrictions before the federal government signs off.
And back home, the confirmation of 3 new COVID-19 cases in New Zealand and the associated administrative bungles has dampened some enthusiasm for a travel bubble with the Pacific. But it also further highlighted the difficult bind they find themselves in, risk the devastation of the coronavirus or prolong their economic suffering. RNZ Pacific's Jamie Tahana reports.
Fletcher Melvin, the head of the Cook Islands Chamber of Commerce and the Private Sector Task Force, has been pushing hard for a travel bubble. When Aotearoa declared 0 cases a week ago, he was ecstatic, and so was the government. 87% of the country's economy relies on tourism, 3/4 of those visitors from New Zealand. But when 2 cases were declared this week, and the revelations of quarantine and border failures, Mr Melvin admits he was rattled. But he's still keen.
At this point, if things go well and they can quickly contain it, then we still think that it's viable and they can put some other things in place. But there are people in the Cook Islands that are worried about it. They're still very worried about it, and fair enough.
The Cook Islands is lifting its quarantine restrictions for passengers arriving from New Zealand this weekend. It was hoped the move would be reciprocated. But in Parliament, Cook Islands Prime Minister Henry Puna called the developments concerning, saying he's keeping a close eye on things.
We must continue to be vigilant in our control of our borders. We cannot afford to relax, but we have every confidence in the abilities of our medical professionals to give us the best advice that has so far seen us through this COVID challenge.
But in Samoa, which was so devastated by the measles last year, any enthusiasm has waned. Prime Minister Tuilaepa Sailele Malielinga'oi told his programme on Radio 2AP that plans to reopen the border to New Zealand are being reconsidered. That could also throw a spanner into plans to bring home hundreds of seasonal workers still stranded here. An Otago University epidemiologist, Professor Michael Baker, says they have a right to be sceptical.
I think that is the question that Pacific Islands will now have when they look at New Zealand. Is New Zealand taking enough precautions to ensure our elimination status is maintained? It goes both ways, because many Pacific Islands, they've worked very hard to exclude this virus entirely.
On the whole, Michael Baker says it's unlikely community transmission is in New Zealand, but it's probably wise to hold off bubble plans for a couple of weeks. Colin Tukuitonga, a public health expert at Auckland University, who is a bubble advocate, says he can understand why the mood has dampened.
But obviously the fact that it wasn't particularly well managed would cause some concern. And so I can imagine people proceeding cautiously now.
But Colin Tukuitonga still thinks a bubble is a good idea, adding that Pacific countries are confronted by a horrendously difficult decision.
It's a hard one, and at the end of the day, it's a decision balancing the health risks of introducing the virus and the ongoing destruction or decimation of the economy. So at some stage, the islands would want to make a call on what they would want to do.
The Cook Islands still plans to open their borders this month, and Tahiti will be doing the same next month. But both have said they won't hesitate to quickly change their minds. For Checkpoint, ko Jamie Tahana aho.
So, a lot of you are getting in touch about the rules around wearing masks, how we're handling isolation, and also the 2 women who tested positive for COVID-19 after getting an exemption to leave isolation. On the subject of Chris Bishop, the National Party MP who advocated or assisted them trying to get their application viewed, this person says, "I'm appalled that the government is trying to pass the buck on their own mess up. Bishop was doing his job. The Health Ministry failed to do theirs." Around isolation, someone else says, how does it work if hotels are housing both those returning from overseas and in isolation and New Zealanders staying in the same hotels? Yeah, we were curious about that too. And how are they managing those arriving in isolation today in the same hotel as those who are at day 13 of isolation? Well, to start off with, we asked for a list of all the hotels. Let me see how many I can get through. There's about 15 in Auckland, Crown Plaza, 4 Points, Grand Mercure, Novotel Airport, Novotel Ellerslie, Pullman Hotel, Ridges Hotel, Sabal Manukau, SO Hotel, Sedema, Waipuna, Nomi, Grand Millennium, Holiday Inn, Jet Park Hotel. In Wellington, the Bay Plaza is an isolation hotel, and in Christchurch, the Chateau and the Commodore. So if you're booking and you're wondering, that is the list. We can probably put that up somewhere. I'm looking at my producer. We can probably put that up on our Facebook page so that you can go back and check if you want. The other thing is, we did call a few of these hotels today and ask them if we could book in. Some of them were very upfront and told us that they were helping the government with the COVID response and were not taking any outside guests. Others explained to us they do take outside guests, but they house them in other wings of the hotel. However, we do know someone who booked into one of these hotels. They were going on a baby moon. They wanted to take their wife for a weekend away, and they have told us when they called the hotel, there was no indication that they were an isolation hotel.
RNZ News at 6. Ngā mihi nui ko Susana Leia tāua tēnei. National MP Chris Bishop asked Ministry of Health officials to expeditiously look into the case of the 2 women seeking early release from managed isolation. The pair were let out early following the death of a parent, but were not tested before they left and now have COVID-19. Chris Bishop says he was contacted by a mutual friend in the UK asking if he could help the women. He told Checkpoint he advised the 2 sisters to email him, and he forwarded the email to the ministry.
I wrote back to them and said that I'd forwarded it to the email address and let them know, and they wrote back and essentially informed me about the situation they were in, and said thanks for doing that.
National MP Chris Bishop. Meanwhile, the Prime Minister says she's focusing on fixing border controls, not hunting down those who made a mistake. There's confusion over whether or not passengers will be required to wear masks on Trans-Tasman flights in the wake of the 3 current cases ahead. The sisters who returned from the UK and a man coming back from Pakistan transited through Australian airports. The Director-General of Health, Ashley Bloomfield, says he has asked his team to look at the option of requiring all passengers to wear masks on Trans-Tasman flights. That was followed by a statement from the Ministry of Health saying medical-grade masks should be offered to passengers on international flights, and they should be strongly encouraged to wear them. Air New Zealand, however, says while masks will be offered on flights, they won't be compulsory. New Zealand First has warned against celebrating the latest firearms reforms, saying it still wants changes. The legislation, which paves the way for a gun register, passed its final reading in Parliament this afternoon. All governing parties, including New Zealand First, backed the bill, but its senior MP Ron Mark says his party will push for future changes.
This government, and New Zealand First as part of this government, is passing this legislation. But don't be rolling out the bubbles and popping the cork too quickly, because after this election's over, there will be closer scrutiny on what we've done.
Ron Mark says New Zealand First has secured a review of the legislation in 3 years' time, 2 years earlier than originally planned. Ukraine's Secret Service is claiming it stopped a neo-Nazi cell during its investigation into the distribution of the Christchurch terrorists' so-called manifesto. Last year, the ambassador of Ukraine vowed to prosecute anyone distributing the document after it was revealed it was being reproduced and sold through an online messaging channel set up 2 days after the March 15th attacks. In a statement, the country's Secret Service now says it's discovered guns, ammunition and explosives during raids in Ukraine's 2 largest cities. Photographs seen by RNZ show the raid and what it appears to be a clandestine printing room with stacks of books wrapped in paper. Donald Trump has labelled his former National Security Advisor John Bolton a dope and a disgruntled boring fool in response to explosive allegations made in his new book. Our Washington correspondent Jagruti Dave reports.
As well as calling John Bolton a liar, President Trump claimed everybody in the White House hated him. Later, in a Fox News interview, the president said his former National Security Advisor broke the law. It comes after passages from John Bolton's book emerged in the media, where he claimed the president asked Chinese Premier Xi Jinping for political help and accused the president of giving personal favours to dictators he liked. In an interview with ABC News, Bolton gave his view on Donald Trump's relationship with his Russian counterpart.
I think Putin thinks he can play him like a fiddle. I think he sees that he's not faced with a serious adversary here.
The Department of Justice is seeking an emergency order to block the publication of Bolton's book.
Jagruti Dave reporting. It's 4 minutes past 6. The All Blacks captain Sam Cane is again missing from the Chiefs lineup, named to play the Blues in Hamilton on Saturday night. Cane is suffering from a back injury, which meant he also missed the Chiefs' 1-point loss to the Highlanders in the opening round of Super Rugby Aotearoa last weekend. Aaron Cruden starts at first 5 and the only change to the starting lineup, while another former All Black, 38-year-old loose forward Adam Thompson, is on the bench. English football's Premier League has resumed with Black Lives Matter printed on the shirts of all the players from Manchester City, Arsenal, Aston Villa and Sheffield United. The BBC's Laura Scott reports.
After exactly 100 days away, the Premier League was back. But before the action got underway, there were 2 powerful displays of unity. First, a minute's silence for all those affected by coronavirus. And then, when the whistle went to resume the season, all the players, officials and coaching staff from Aston Villa and Sheffield United took a knee in support of the Black Lives Matter movement. The same was repeated later at Manchester City versus Arsenal. Those watching from home had their first experience of artificial crowd noise and saw fans beamed into the grounds on giant screens.
Laura Scott reporting. City beat Arsenal 3-0 to remain in second place, still 22 points behind runaway leaders Liverpool. Sheffield United and Aston Villa had a 0-0 draw. That's the news.
Coming up on 9 to noon tomorrow, fearless Filipino journalist Maria Ressa speaks out after her conviction on a spurious cyber libel charge. What's next for Cook Islands Prime Minister, who's standing down after a decade in power? London's pop art scene in the 50s and 60s, and the Kiwi maverick Billy Apple, who helped shape it. And Grant Smithies plays some post-punk. Join me, Lynn Freeman, and for Catherine Ryan on 9 to noon on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland, Auckland and Coromandel Peninsula, fine spells and a few showers. Bay of Plenty and Taupo, rain with heavy falls, easing later tomorrow. For Waikato, Waitomo, Taumaranui and Taranaki, rain easing tonight, fine spells and isolated showers tomorrow. Gisborne, Hawke's Bay and Wairarapa, rain becoming widespread this evening, heavy falls for the Gisborne Ranges. Whanganui and Taihape to Wellington, rain easing and becoming patchy overnight. Nelson, patchy rain. Bulla and Westland mostly fine, isolated showers for northern Bulla. Marlborough and Canterbury rain, possibly heavy with snow to about 500 metres, gradually easing tomorrow. Otago, Southland and Fiordland mainly fine, isolated showers about the south coast clearing tonight. Chatham Islands, cloudy periods. RNZ National, it's coming up to 7 minutes past 6.
Thanks, Susanna. If you're just tuning in, this is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. As we discussed earlier in the programme, there is confusion tonight whether or not masks will be compulsory on inbound flights from Australia. It comes as two New Zealand sisters from the UK tested positive for COVID-19 after transiting through Brisbane, and a 60-year-old man from Pakistan tested positive after transiting through Melbourne. Here's what the Director General of Health, Dr. Ashley Bloomfield, announced today.
What I've learnt about the flights from Australia to New Zealand, such as the one that the two cases came on, and indeed the case today who actually wore a mask throughout the flight. I asked my team yesterday to look at the option of requiring all passengers to wear masks on those flights, because it seems that people are coming from a whole lot of international flights and transiting through and then coming on, and just as an additional precaution, the advice from our infection prevention and control team was to make masks available. I felt it was important to require masks for the duration of that flight, so we're putting that in place as well.
Now, Air New Zealand has told us today, while masks will be available for passengers on flights from Australia, they won't be compulsory. And that's despite the Ministry of Health telling us passengers should be strongly encouraged to use them. The Airline Pilots Association has been calling for the compulsory use of masks for months. Its president, Andrew Ridling, joins me now. Andrew, are you clear on what the deal is here?
Oh, absolutely, Lisa. We've been recommending face coverings, as you said, for a couple of months now, and we're very pleased that the Director General has today picked up our recommendation and is going to go forward with it.
But it's only a recommendation, as you understand it. It's not compulsion. You don't have to do it.
At this stage, I think that's the case. Obviously, with the safety precautions that already are used upon aircraft, with the HEPA filters, the vertical airflows, masks just give us that extra piece of mitigation to not allow COVID back into New Zealand.
We've actually had a few people texting us just before you came on to ask about the quality of air in planes. So how good is it?
Yeah, well, the quality of air in aeroplanes is as good as any surgical operating theatre. The airflow is from ceiling to floor, and they use these things called HEPA filters, which take out about 99.9% of all particles within the air. So it's very, very safe. In fact, it's probably better than your operating theatre, to be honest with you, with everybody facing forward. The use of masks is just there as that extra mitigation to ensure it's not passed from one person to another.
So if the air filter is so good, then are the masks just to make us feel better?
Yes, I think so, but it's also to ensure that, that extra mitigation is there. We don't want somebody to pass this on an aeroplane. And as you know, masks are actually there to stop people passing it to the next person, not to stop you actually receiving it. So I think currently at the moment we've been advocating for airlines to have masks, as well as having some sort of alcohol wipe so that you can clean your own area around you so that you feel comfortable where you're sitting and comfortable with the people around you.
So have all your pilots been wearing them out of, their own choice?
Yeah, absolutely. We are supplied with masks and with sanitisation liquids when we check in and at our flight planning in Auckland.
So what's the uptake? Is 100% of the pilots that you represent, are they wearing them?
From what I've been told, yes, 100%. We wear them from beginning. Don't forget, we've been flying freight operations for the last 2 or 3 months through the whole of the lockdown. So our pilots have taken this quite seriously, and they take the whole situation in front of us very seriously.
So, given that it's not going to be compulsory, it's just a strong recommendation, do you see any difficulties here? Because who's going to be doing the encouraging? Is that going to be left down to other crew on the plane?
Well, as you say, it's a strong recommendation. We're hoping that the Director General will lift that to being a compulsory. This is what ICAO, who's the regulatory body of aviation, has suggested. IATA have come out strongly and said the same. And, of course, our international body of ALPA have been pushing the use of face coverings for some time now.
Andrew, while I've got you here, in the last sort of 48 hours or so, there are some new protocols for air crews, international air crews, and obviously your pilots will be included in this. And the guidance for what crews are supposed to do returning from offshore differs depending on whether their destination is considered low, medium or high risk. Are you clear which countries are low, medium or high risk?
Well, we actually haven't had that defined yet, but I think to reassure the public is that the pilots have been living and breathing this now for quite a long time. It's fairly new to you today. For example, if we go into China at the moment, we've been operating freight flights there. We are sent to an airport detention quarantine facility for the 24 hours that we're there. You're locked in your room. You can't leave. You're escorted by Chinese quarantine personnel. And then when you come to leave, you're escorted back to the aeroplane.
Do they stay at your door, Andrew, to make sure you don't nip out for anything? Is there someone actually at the door of your room making sure you're not wobbling off anywhere?
No, I don't think there was anybody outside the door when I was there, but there's nowhere to go. It's at the airport. They've overtaken the airport hotel there. But I think there is somebody on each floor. And so we've been living and breathing. It's the same thing in America, in Los Angeles and San Francisco. We are quarantined to our room. A little bit more trust there, but from the point of view, pilots are fairly responsible people. They don't want to bring this home either, remember.
So that's freight. Can you clarify when you'll be bringing passengers back and forward from
We've been
Shanghai?
carrying passengers backwards and forwards. From Shanghai? I don't know. You'd have to ask the airlines that. That hasn't currently occurred at this stage. But we have been carrying passengers on different flights throughout the whole COVID experience so far.
And also with those sort of high-risk areas, are you completely confident that your crews are not mixing?
Oh, absolutely. From my perspective, on all the hotels I've been at, it has been taken very seriously, especially by pilots. And I'm suggesting cabin crew are exactly the same. We don't stay in the same facilities at a lot of the destinations, but where I've stayed with pilots, it's taken very seriously.
Are you going to be involved, your association going to be involved in working out which countries should be considered low, medium and high risk? Will you have some input?
I hope so. We've got representation on that, on the that group. We've also got representation on the Trans-Tasman border group, and we're ensuring that we can put our, the knowledge we've gained from overseas destinations is pushed back into New Zealand as well.
Do you think actually a Trans-Tasman bubble is realistic at this point when we've got 3 new cases and they're all related to border?
Absolutely. I think if we're going to have New Zealand go ahead and we're going to build out of this, then we need to understand there is risk, and I think the Prime Minister has acknowledged this. But the solution is to mitigate that risk as best as possible. And hence coming back to the original question that is, or statement, that one of those mitigations is the wearing of masks and the use of sanitary wipes and that on board aircraft.
Appreciate your time. Thank you so much for joining us. That is the Airline Pilots Association President, Andrew Ridling. The number of people being denied benefits because their partner earns too much has skyrocketed. Job seeker benefits can be cut to nothing depending on partners' incomes, despite recommendations by the government's own welfare expert advisory group to scrap the rule. The chair of that advisory group says New Zealand's welfare system isn't working as it should and we need to do better. Nita Blake-Person reports.
COVID-19 has put immense pressure on New Zealand's welfare system, with more than 43,500 people going on the job seeker benefit between February and May. Cindy Kiro chaired the government's welfare expert advisory group last year. She says the current situation is hard to watch.
I watch in despair as people are desperate for food and desperate for help. But it was frustrating really to watch it pre-COVID. Because I thought the need is so high out there. It would have been good if we'd been able to move that dial earlier. I think actually COVID has helped us change the nature of that discussion. I think there's much greater willingness and recognition that we need to help each other out because of crises like this.
The existing job seeker benefit for people over 25 is currently set at a maximum of $250 after tax. But for some people unable to work, the benefit isn't available because they're in a relationship.
Completely stripped me of any independence. I have to go through and request anything from him. I can't just go out if I need new shoes. I can't go out and buy new shoes. I have to ask him, and we have to budget for it for like weeks,
Brittany McLean lives in Rotorua and has rheumatoid arthritis, making it nearly impossible for her to work in most jobs. But she can't get the job seeker or the disability benefit because she lives with her partner and he earns around $945 per week before tax.
After paying a third of our rent, a third of our income on rent, another third, if not 2/4, on bills each week, we have about $150 for groceries, petrol, medical supplies, all of that other junk. It isn't a cost of life, I suppose.
The number of people being refused benefits because of their relationship status jumped to 414 during April, having been less than 80 for the 3 months prior. Action Station campaigner Ruby Powell says that's just the tip of the iceberg.
Those numbers would just be the tip of the iceberg, because a lot of people will go online to the WINS website, put in their details and be told that they aren't able to get any welfare support.
While job seeker benefits taper off once a person and their partner earn more than $90 per week, a new $490 weekly payment for people who've lost their jobs due to COVID is not impacted unless their partner earns more than $2,000 per week. Brittany says that seems particularly unfair.
Seeing how much people who've lost their job from COVID, their partners are allowed to earn a week, with them still getting assistance, and what we can earn a week and no assistance, it's really unfair. I understand losing your job due to COVID is really hard, but these are people who have had combined incomes for a long time. They've probably got a lot more savings than someone like we do. It makes you kind of feel like you're being punished. And I didn't choose to be born with arthritis. It's not something I asked for in my life.
And Cindy Kero says now is the time for change.
I think COVID could be a good catalyst for actually implementing some of the things that needed to be done. There has been a shift in public attitude, which is good, and there is a need to address sustainable and survivable income levels for households, particularly the most vulnerable.
In a statement, the Social Development Minister, Carmel Sepuloni, says she will begin further policy work on relationship settings in the welfare system later this year. A spokesperson would not give a timeline for this work or whether it might happen before the September election. For Checkpoint, Cornita Blakeperson, Aho.
It is, we'll call it 19 minutes past 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. In an explosive behind-the-scenes portrayal, President Trump's former National Security Advisor John Bolton has accused him of a series of abuses of power, including seeking China's help to get him re-elected. In his book, Mr Bolton says his former boss personally asked Xi Jinping to help him win the 2020 election by urging China to buy agricultural produce from US farmers. President Trump has responded by labelling Mr Bolton a dope and a disgruntled, boring fool. The BBC's David Willis reports.
He's a controversial figure whose hardline views on American foreign policy led to clashes with President Trump during his 17 months as National Security Advisor. Now, in the first memoir by such a high-ranking administration official, John Bolton provides a withering portrait of his former boss in what's being touted as the book Donald Trump doesn't want you to read. Referring to a meeting with President Xi Jinping in June 2019, Bolton accuses Donald Trump of soliciting the Chinese leader's help in the forthcoming US presidential election. Trump, he writes, was pleading with Xi to ensure he'd win, having stressed the importance of farmers and increased Chinese purchases of soybeans and wheat in the electoral outcome. Trump urged China to, in Bolton's words, buy as many American farm products as it could. The US government has now filed a lawsuit seeking to block the book's release, alleging it contains information that could cause irreparable harm to national security.
This book is full of classified information, which is inexcusable. Former National Security Advisor John Bolton should know all too well that it's unacceptable to have highly classified information from the government of the United States in a book that will be published. It's unacceptable.
John Bolton is set to go even further in a television interview this weekend, giving this view of the president's relationship with Vladimir Putin.
I think Putin thinks he can play him like a fiddle. I think Putin is smart, tough. I think he sees that he's not faced with a serious adversary here. I don't think he's worried about Donald Trump.
But speaking on Fox News, Mr. Trump denied allegations contained in the Bolton memoir.
Nobody has been tough on China, and nobody has been tough on Russia like I have. And that's in the record books, and it's not even close. The last administration did nothing on either. And then in terms of Bolton, he broke the law.
Blistering though John Bolton's attacks are on President Trump, his is just the latest in a string of memoirs and tell-alls. Others are set to follow that will examine the persona and the performance of the man in the White House in the run-up to this year's presidential election.
And that was the BBC's David Willis with that report. It's Men's Health Week and mental health continues to be a focus as the country tries to tackle appalling rates of suicide and smash the stigma attached to mental illness. Athletes are playing a significant role, with many high-profile stars opening up on their own struggles and encouraging others to ask for help. Rugby reporter Joe Porter spoke to All Blacks back George Bridge, Anton Leonard-Brown and Rieko Ioane about the challenges they faced and the tools they used to keep their minds healthy.
And it's England who come away as winners. Too good for the All Blacks.
The All Blacks were visibly upset after being dumped out of last year's World Cup, and wing George Bridge turned to familiar faces to help him through.
Stuff like that can impact your life hugely, and I've been pretty fortunate with having a really good people that I keep around me that have been there since day dot. I've got my brothers and my mum and dad, and I've got my best mate who's living up in Auckland. They're always people that I can talk to.
Midfielder Anton Leonard-Brown says it took time to learn to deal with the pressures of being a professional athlete, such as injuries or missing selection.
At the start, all those things sort of went through my mind, and, I've spent a lot of time before worrying about uncontrollables, and it's just a waste of energy, really, and that really brings you down. So I can only control what I can control, and that's turning up to training, having a positive attitude, and emptying the tank every time I play.
Outside back, Rieko Ioane says having a healthy head is as important as having a healthy body.
As professional rugby players, it's a huge part. Having the mental health to bounce back from non-selection or an injury, it's every day for us. And we know that if you have a good, healthy mind and, you're thinking clearly and straight, then it's only going to benefit the team.
He says the myth of the strong, silent type must be shattered.
That stigma of sort of being a tough guy and sort of bottling it up has become so apparent sort of over the last few years. So players as well would hope so that they're comfortable enough to talk about their problems. Mental health is extremely important, especially in our game and our community.
Leonard-Brown agrees, and he's encouraging men to open up, be vulnerable and share the load.
I've got a circle of people that I really trust, so they are people I can talk to, and I'm my most vulnerable with them. To be able to express how you feel is really important, and I guess that's one thing we struggle with, especially as men in New Zealand, is that we don't like to talk. It's seen as a weakness if you do, but I see it as a real strength.
Growing up on a farm near Gisborne, Bridge spent time around plenty of strong men, but he says the country must continue to talk about the mental health of farmers.
Hopefully, new Super Rugby competition can allow them to, go catch up with their mates and have a beer at the pub or whatever. And I think because you can get pretty bloody isolated out in the farm or get pretty lonely, so just little stuff like that can make a huge difference, I reckon.
Ioane says having more Pacifica and Māori coaches in top-level rugby would also make a difference.
A lot of the island boys would look to someone like Tana who's been around and, someone they feel comfortable with.
Life can be uncomfortable, and Bridge initially struggled after moving to Christchurch to chase his rugby dream. However, he wasn't afraid to ask for help.
I was not far from going back up home because not in a good headspace, and I was at a training for old boys, my club team, and I was just training like rubbish, and I was like, wow, what am I doing here? So I got on the phone to mum and dad and said, look, I'm not really enjoying it down here, and said I'm pretty keen to come home. Mum was like, yep, righto, we'll get you home. The old man was like, no, we'll come down and sort you out. And they ended up coming down the next week and helped me move into a new flat. Sort of went uphill from there and turned out all right.
If more men were willing to talk, New Zealand's suicide statistics might take a turn for the better. Mō te hōtaka o te ahi pōnei, ko Joe Porter aho.
In breaking news, it's been revealed the military official who was yesterday announced as the new head of our border controls has in fact been in charge of isolation facilities and repatriation for at least the past month. The Prime Minister yesterday said she was bringing in the military to resolve current border botch-ups, but Checkpoint has had confirmation tonight that Air Commodore Digby Webb has already been in that role. Checkpoint understands he was actually in charge of the unit when the decision was made to grant a compassionate exemption to 2 sisters who were released from managed isolation early before they were tested for COVID-19. The pair later tested positive and more than 300 people are now being contact traced. To the UK now, where the famous theatre district is in a battle for survival because of the coronavirus pandemic. The producers of Les Miserables, Mary Poppins and Hamilton, says his shows won't return to the West End this year. Social distancing measures are still in place, which means heading out to the show is well and truly off the cards. And big productions say they've got no indication when that will change. The BBC's David Silito reports.
I love him, but when the night is over...
The lockdown may be lifting in some areas, but theatres are staying closed. So too the pubs and restaurants that depend on them. Theatreland is a ghost town and tough decisions are being made.
Les Miserables, Mary Poppins, Hamilton, Phantom of the Opera. Cameron Mackintosh is the biggest name in British theatre and he is considering laying off all his employees. And you can be certain that others will follow.
The issue, the job retention scheme that's kept these venues afloat, is due to end in October, and the theatres will still be closed.
What happens between the moment it winds down or it disappears and the moment that we can perform with revenue, and that is not possible while social distancing is in place. We don't think that will be possible until spring next year, very possibly.
It'll be a while before we see this again live. Tomorrow Rocco is part of the Creative Industries Federation, which is today warning that 400,000 jobs in the cultural and creative sector are at risk. And some of the most vulnerable are here, the smaller venues in places like East Anglia.
If social distancing remains in place and we aren't able to, as a collective of venues, regain our full-scale operation, 50% of those venues currently say they will have to close permanently beyond April the 1st.
Theatreland. It's only a part of our creative economy, but it's a vital part. And it's going dark.
And that was the BBC's David Silito reporting there. If you're just joining us in breaking news, it's been revealed that the military official who was yesterday announced as the new head of our border controls has in fact been in charge of those isolation facilities and repatriation for at least the past month. You'll remember the Prime Minister made the announcement yesterday, said she was bringing in the military to resolve the border botch-ups that have happened. But Checkpoint has had it confirmed that in fact Air Commodore Digby Webb was already in that role and perhaps was actually in charge of the unit when the decision was made to grant early leave from isolation from the 2 women who were returning from the UK to see a sick relative. Now, you all know they were not tested before they left, but were later tested for COVID-19 and tested positive. And now a few hundred people, more than 300 people, are being contact traced as a result of that. A lot of you getting in touch about masks, which is the discussion today, recommendation that we might have to wear them. David says, for heaven's sake, Air New Zealand, make mask wearing compulsory on all flights. Stop the shilly-shallying. We'll be back tomorrow.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. The Prime Minister says she's focusing on fixing border controls, not hunting down those who made a mistake. The police have seized vehicles, drugs and firearms and charged 13 people after an operation targeting the Hells Angels gang. And Ukraine's Secret Service is claiming it stopped a neo-Nazi cell during its investigation into the distribution of the Christchurch terrorists' so-called manifesto. Those are the headlines. Our next news will be at 7.
Tonight on Nights, Alison Ballance hangs with the emperor penguins and discovers, despite being surrounded by it, procuring water at Scott Base is a tricky business. Eleanor Tremere assesses what it takes to make a science fiction cult classic, while our astronomer Alan Gilmore has news of a black hole just 1,000 light years away. Not that there's any light coming out of it. On Nights with me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.